for your reflection in the mirror.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Okay. Is the sound of the mic, what kind of mic pickup?
Just the camera mic.
Okay.
We have a recording here too. Okay.
All right, do it, bro. Teach us. Teach us what you've learned.
So, very excited to do this. I'm going to start with kind of an overview, which is a principle. And the idea is that evolution never replaces anything that came before it. It just adds onto it. So essentially, what the universe has been doing is essentially layering these new skills, these new kind of capacities, layering these capacities on top of each other. And so all the things that have come before are present in anything new. On that chain of ancestry, of course, there are different chains. Mm-hmm. But for example, for the human, we retain all of our previous ancestral physiological levels, and that also brings with them the mental levels or the consciousness levels. And so the two kind of domains that I'm going to touch on are essentially the evolution of the mind and the body over the past 4 billion years. I'm not going to talk about before that, so from the Big Bang to the first life, because it's at a very low level that's hard for humans to resonate with or empathize with.
Right.
But from the start of life to now, there are 7 kind of major stages of evolution that have happened, and from those, there has been a physiological thing that has happened, and as a result of the physiological thing, a level of consciousness that has emerged. And these two things are happening at the same time. The idea is that they can't be reduced to one another. You can't say, oh, it's just the physiological process and the consciousness is like a hallucination, or you can't just say it's just the consciousness thing and there's no, acetylcholine or there's no receptor that's correlated with it. They're parallel, but fundamentally distinct in the sense that the feeling of falling in love is different than the chemicals of falling in love. Mm-hmm. And it's important to remember that these things are both valid. On this chart, I'm only going to list the consciousness things or the mind things. The body things maybe I'll mention, but it's a lot of information to put up there, especially if it's more complex.
Cool.
So I'm going to start with our first ancestor, which is the first life, which are cells. So this is what, and then I'm going to associate all the things that emerge from the level of consciousness. So cells, their main battle, what they're trying to do, what cells are trying to do, is they're trying to survive instead of die. So this is the fundamental level of needs that the cells have with them, is survival versus death.
And you said this is the list of the mind?
Yeah. So this is how it feels. This is what they need to do. Like the consciousness of a cell wants to survive as opposed to die. There are metabolic processes, circadian rhythm, these sorts of things. Cell memory is allowing for that consciousness to emerge. But the feeling of a cell is the feeling of the desire for survival and the rejection of the possibility of death.
So at the most deepest level.
Yeah, the first. So because before that, atoms, for example, molecules, they don't care about life or death. They don't exhibit behavior that shows self-preservation.
Do atoms die?
Not really, no. Which is kind of crazy. As far as we know, they don't.
That's the whole law of like energy, right? An energy can't be destroyed or created.
Yeah, created.
It can only be transformed.
You can technically destroy them. You can't destroy the energy that's in them, but you can destroy their configuration. It's just very hard because.
Yeah, but at the chemical level, you're saying that it's not about survival. There's no care. There's no intention at all. It's just is what it is.
Right. So below this, you could imagine at the very beginning, there's just void. There's like literally nothing. There's like vacuum of empty space. That's the majority of what our bodies are made of. This room is made of.
And then it's the like atomic table.
Yeah. Then you would say, if you want to get technically, you'd say then there's the quantum, but you can say there's the atomic, atom level, molecule level, and then cells are the next real big level.
All right, cool.
So the ancestor is the cells. Their consciousness, or their kind of what you could think of as their needs is survival versus death. And then they have a intelligence that emerges at this level too. And this is the kinesthetic intelligence. So this is the understanding of where one is in space. I'll put it in human terms because we experience all these levels as a human. So I'll put it what it means for a human. Is kinesthetic intelligence is essentially the intelligence that allows you to know where you are in space. It allows you to manipulate your body with tactical efficiency. So what we colloquially refer to as someone being clumsy, or someone, the opposite of being clumsy, that would be an indicator towards kinesthetic intelligence. Someone having the ability in their head to understand where they are, like in a city, or where they are in a room or in a house. These sorts of things are also associated with kinesthetic intelligence, as well as the ability to manipulate three-dimensional objects in your head. So, some amazing engineers and stuff can think about, if we rotated it this way, they don't have to sketch it out. They just know that there would be a contact point if you rotated it this way, or that sort of thing. Handymen are really good at this sort of thing.
It's good to know because I have one of the worst kinesthetic intelligences on the planet.
Yeah, it's good to know. And that is essentially...
That's what it's called.
Yeah, the human being experiencing that intelligence. In the cell, you have a very limited body and nervous system, so the only thing they're feeling is I'm here, or this thing's coming to me.
Right.
They don't feel pain, they don't feel anything like that, but they just know, I'm being touched.
Right.
So that's the intelligence they have. So I'll write it down here, kinesthetic. And then there's I might run up against this, but I'll do my best. There's a level of emotion, or kind of a polarity of emotion that is available. What I mean by that is there's actually different than a need, which is kind of a goal you can do. It's the primal form of a goal. There's also a range of feeling that is possible, and we call this type, or emotion. And polarity, and these always exist on polarity, so there's always two when they emerge. In the same way that there's two here. The energy or the emotion that's available at the first level is activity versus passivity. So this is the rawest form of any emotion. Every other emotion has this at its base. So no matter if it's happiness, sadness, whatever it is, the dial underneath everything else is it an active feeling? Is it a passive feeling? And this is because that's the two states that cells have. They have every single cell in the world, on the planet, in your body, every single one, there's not one exception, has a circadian rhythm. What this means is it essentially has a period of low activity, of decreasing activity, the midnight of activity, or the lowest activity, slowly increasing activity, maximum activity, and then decreasing activity again. And this is, if things are going correctly, which they are for other beings that are not humans, this is in alignment with the sun. And so the activity peaks when the sun is at its peak, and it decreases. During winter, it is lower overall because the sun peaks lower. During summer, the whole thing is higher. So there's a larger circadian rhythm, which we call the seasons, and then there's the daily circadian rhythm, which we call the hour. And essentially, these are the two states that cells have. They have moments of kind of metabolic lowness, and we feel this in the body. We feel when the body's trying to slow down and when it's speeding up.
Yeah.
Caffeine speeds it up, and we feel it's kind of crazy. And so the most primal emotion is activity versus passivity. The most primal.
Gotcha.
So this is the first. I use the Hindu term, but I call it a chakra because it holds these different things. It holds a need, it holds a intelligence, and it holds a emotion, or a range of emotion. So then let's do the second. The second ancestor is the fish. And when I refer to the ancestors, it's also just helpful to know that these are the original one. There are fish that have evolved since humans have evolved too that exhibit more complex characteristics, like the prime fish, the early fish. So cells are around 4 billion years old, and fish are around 540 million years old. So there were a lot of cell times.
How old are the fish?
Fish are around 540 million years old. 540 million. Yeah. So cells, essentially, initially they're single cell homies, and then these single cell homies differentiate. They become a bunch of different types. They start evolving, they become a ton of different types. And two of these team up. So one of these, which is really like high energy, but it's not incredibly like effective. It gets eaten all the time. It's not very protective. And one of these that's really like big and burly, but is like really slow. Essentially, they team up. So the mitochondria, which is this like crazy crack cell, gets swallowed up by this larger cell, and they become the first what they call a eukaryotic cell. Which every cell in our body is eukaryotic. Every cell of every living being is.
So technically, the mitochondria is its own cell.
Initially, it was. Now it's the
energy source of the cell.
That's
the
right.
Battery or whatever they call it.
Yeah, powerhouse of the cell.
Yeah.
It's in every single cell in our body. There are mitochondria. In our muscle cells, sometimes there are multiple.
Right.
And you can increase the mitochondria count and this sort of thing.
It's probably just a package.
Okay. But initially they were separate.
Hey. Good.
What do we do?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's hard to say.
Maybe if we all. Yeah, true.
Set a 5-minute timer. I can reformat it too, so I started and moved through. So, yeah, just to cover the space in between there quickly, two different types of cells, one swallowed the other, and that gave birth eventually to all animals. There are living things that are still single cell, but essentially this is a much more powerful type of cell, and it became the kind of foundational thing that allowed for higher animals to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
Higher animals couldn't emerge though until there was an ozone layer. So that came around 600 million years ago, and then after there was an ozone layer, which essentially blocks a lot of the sun's radiation, you can have more complex life because it's a more complex environment that is more protected.
How did an ozone layer happen?
Essentially, the single-celled organisms, some of them essentially evolved to become algae, and the algae, what they do is they eat sunlight, and then they, with the energy from that, they convert the carbon dioxide into oxygen. And so essentially, it's really unbelievable to understand that this happened or imagine this happened. Every bit of oxygen that we breathe it's still being created, but the initial formation of the atmosphere came because there was algae on the surface of the ocean, and they essentially converted pretty much all of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere into oxygen. And so it made ozone just means oxygen layer. So it made an oxygen layer which protects from the sun because enough of it is thick enough to block. And you get all this crazy atmospheric effects because gravity is holding the oxygen in, and so it starts radiating, reflecting the sun. And that essentially creates a hospitable environment for higher life to emerge. And so eventually, during this period called the Cambrian explosion, which happens around 50 million years after the ozone layer, which is a pretty fast evolutionary, you get a fuck ton of these new animals. And the format of that is mainly you get some early invertebrate homies, and then soon you have these fish. And fish are essentially characterized by a symmetrical body plan because the step I'm skipping here, but I'll mention briefly, is the invertebrates. So invertebrates are essentially a multicellular organism that has no center. So think about a starfish or a jellyfish. There's no head. I mean, there's a top, but it doesn't really matter. It could be facing. It doesn't matter. It's in three-dimensional space. It doesn't really matter because what it is you have these cells, but now the cells, the eukaryotic cells, have differentiated, and then they've teamed up. And so they've created essentially tissues, which you can imagine is some tissues are good for digestion, some tissues are good for locomotion, some tissues are good for signaling other cells. Whereas in an in just one cell, you have what you call organelles, which are the primitive form of organs that like they talk to each other. But now you have a whole other level of complexity, which is whole cells differentiating and talking to each other. So the early forms of muscle cells, nerve cells, these sorts of things. And so invertebrates, like a jellyfish, have what they call a decentralized nervous system, which means there's no brain. There's just basically a system of wires that send signals to each other, but you can cut off a part of a jellyfish and it can be fine. Whereas you can cut off a part of a human, it's not fine, because we have it centralized. And so that means that their body plan is not symmetric. It doesn't have to be symmetric. It is often because that's very efficient, but it doesn't have to be. And it also doesn't have to like have a forward facingness. Whereas every animal that has a central nervous system has a forward face sticking there. And so fish are a little bit down the line, and the fish essentially has evolved, instead of having a decentralized nervous system, it centralized it and protected it with a spine. So in jellyfish, you can literally see their nerve fibers. If you look at a jellyfish with light behind it, you can like see the nerve fibers that are controlling it. In a fish, because it's centralized and now it's really important that all of it stays very intact, they've essentially developed a hard thing around it, which is bone. And we still have it right now, which is the spine.
Wow.
And this is it first emerged with fish as an armor for the spine. And so if someone like breaks their back, anywhere lower than that, they lose contact, right? So there's a top where the signal is coming from, and it can only propagate as far down as there isn't a block or a break or something like this, which is why the spine is there. And the only reason the spine has like discrete vertebrae is so that we can like move, But it would want to be even more, solidified armor if it could. But this allows us to move, bend, so that's why it's like that. And so fish, that's what they have that's very different, which is the spine. And they have a very primitive form of the brain. It's not the early fish. It's not like we would associate it with our brain stem. So we wouldn't even consider it part of the brain proper. But for them, technically, you would say, well, they have a primitive brain, which is our brain stem. And so they unlock a new level, given this new hardware that they have. And this new level is pleasure versus pain. The new need is the desire for pleasure versus the pain.
Wow.
Huh? It's not up yet?
No. So they actually have the hardware to register.
Do you mind if we go down real quick and do this?
Mike, pause the video. Sorry to interrupt. All right, so you got ancestor, need, intelligence, and type.
/ emotion.
So I refer to, it's easier to learn them as kind of need intelligence. I refer to them as level and line, but.
Level and line.
Yeah.
All right, we're back.
We're back. So, a fish. We were just talking about how like I said, I don't have space, unfortunately, to write the body aspects, but this is with a cell, kind of how a cell is. The fish, the thing to remember about the fish is this is now, centralized nervous system with the spine, and then a bunch of different specialized tissues, like digestive tissue, muscle tissue, this sort of stuff, and one big highway, the spine, that's controlling and coordinating all of it from a command center, which is the brain. So if you cut off the head of a fish, it's instantly dead. You cut off a bunch of shit of a jellyfish, doesn't matter. Cut off a thing out of a starfish, doesn't matter. But now it's centralized, so it doesn't matter. And what they have now is the ability to say, I want to go towards that, or I want to go away from that. Like, I feel the need to go towards that, versus I feel the need to go away from that. Cells, they're not really going anywhere. Some of them locomote and stuff, but they're not like trying to really feel something and not feel another thing. They can't differentiate between pleasure and pain. Whereas fish have actually specified cells that are pleasure cells and pain cells that are receptors, rather, that tell them I'm in pain or I'm in pleasure. And the brain can process that as a yay or fuck, let's get the fuck out of here.
So, according to that, how did the cells evolve? Not reproduce, but how do they evolve if they didn't have a need to do anything other than just, they didn't really have a need other than to survive? You're saying basically the survival need was what drove them to just randomly start moving towards one another? And doing shit.
Yeah, I mean, this is why it took like 3 billion years, for anything to happen. Is because
It's like just trial and error, I guess.
yeah, it's really dependent on the environment. So whereas a fish has a lot more control of its interaction with the environment, it can get out of the situation, it can get into a situation. If I'm a cell and I'm like near a geothermal like hot spring, like I really can't. Like I'm kind of going where the water's going, And these homies are in water, so they're really just kind of getting blasted around different places. Some of them over time develop like tails and stuff, but really for a long time, especially the ones that like make up our bodies, they're like pretty posted, trying to just metabolize nutrients and like figure out what's going on. If the fish that's first like, I'm in a bad place, like I gotta get out of here, or like I want to be in that good place. And what's important to note about this is they don't have an ego. So they don't have someone that's saying, oh, we're experiencing pain, that's okay, because we want this thing more than that. They don't have that. They're just like pain bad, pleasure good. And that's often why you see them form schools and stuff, is because they all kind of want the same shit. So they're all like, oh, we're all going towards this like nutrient-dense patch of ocean. Like, we're all going to go there. But there's no one like in charge being like, fish, like get it together, like nutrient pond. Like they're just like all trying to get to the nutrient pond, and that creates this like emergent behavior. So pleasure versus pain. They really hate pain, and they can feel it, so they don't fuck with it, and they don't like it. The intelligence you get because they can experience pain. You get what we call the aesthetic intelligence. So the aesthetic intelligence, and I'll make this make more sense in the human context, all of this, when it's all there, but I'll give a brief overview of the aesthetic intelligence is, which is essentially, in humans, what it looks like is the attunement to that. Essentially the understanding of what causes pleasure, or what causes a certain aesthetic experience to emerge. So people who are really good at colors and putting together outfits and designing spaces. And
just like the golden ratio?
The golden ratio usually results in things that are pretty aesthetically pretty pleasing. So people that have a high aesthetic intelligence may appreciate that more than other people.
Gotcha.
But the aesthetic intelligence is the attunement to like vibe. So if someone's an aesthetic intelligence dominant, like their space that they live in is going to be like very highly manicured to have like a specific vibe. They'll like say like, oh, I'm sorry that's there. That looks fucking up the vibe. Whereas like someone else will be like, I tactically need it there. So like,
Alex Kelly pretty much.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Then the emotional, the type polarity that's available here is the emotions that are associated with pleasure and pain, but they in humans can be crossed, like BDSM and shit. The emotional states associated with those things. So basically attraction versus repulsion. So those are how it feels to want something versus how it feels to not.
Could that be synonymous with craving and aversion?
It can. It exactly is.
Gotcha.
So this is the second chakra. I'll keep going now. I just make more sense to the humans. But I guess the thing to keep in mind is that these are the level and the type are stacked, whereas these, I guess until humans they are stacked. But a fish is dealing with pleasure versus pain and survival versus death. And their emotional states are a combination of these two dials. So how much are they in attraction versus aversion? How much activity do they have versus not? And you can imagine, in a human, this is retained. So for example, you can be passively craving something. Like the first example that came to mind, I apologize, is like a guy sitting in a strip club waiting for the girl to come give him a lap dance. There's like a passive attraction. He's not doing anything. Very low energy, but or you could say maybe like watching a good show or something.
Right.
Something like that. Where there's also active attraction, which is like chasing after her something that you want, physically running after it, or like being very engaged in the pursuit of that thing. There's of course also passive aversion, so like someone being in the room or like some smell being there that you're like, ugh, but like you're not like dipping or like, being covered in like slime and being like, I need it, but so these are the kind of two most basic knobs on emotion. So every other emotion has these as components. The third ancestor is the reptile. this is a very, each of these changes are really drastic, but this is a really drastic change because you're going from essentially no control over your locomotion at all in a three-dimensional ocean, just being whipped around everywhere, to suddenly having control, but still in a three-dimensional space, to now being in a two-dimensional place, which is land. So the reptiles essentially happen when fish start interacting with nutrients that are close to the seabed or the shore. Some of these start getting kind of bonier and bonier fins because they kind of jump up on the seafloor and on the shore and eat a bunch of this shit up there. And essentially they start coming out on top onto the shore and becoming amphibian. So they are still born in the water.
Alligator.
What?
An alligator? Or no?
An alligator is a reptile. An amphibian is like a frog.
Okay.
So they are born in water as an egg, or laid as an egg,
Gotcha.
and then they blossom into like a tadpole or some sort of like early form of the animal, and then they develop into a full being that can then breathe air. But it takes a life cycle, so they're usually born in swamps or like mangrove forests or places where essentially the tides have been regulated by like a cove or like a tree or something that like slows down the crashing of the waves, so the like eggs can kind of survive. So as Earth developed too, because as the land was developing too, there's these new habitats, new stuff starts to develop with them. And so amphibians, I don't classify them the same way I don't put in invertebrates, because they're kind of on their own evolutionary trajectory. We did go through that stage, but it's not as profound as the reptile stage.
Gotcha.
So I keep the kind of the big moment, which is the reptile moment. How a reptile, what's very interesting about a reptile is their whole life is on land. So they're born in an egg, and then they break out of the egg. Parents are gone, but they're there, and they have this incessant urge to just take territory, two-dimensional territory. They just want it. They want to dominate it. If they're a man, specifically if they're a male reptile. So at this level, it doesn't really matter. There's no sex because they just replicate themselves. At this level, you have male and female, but the life cycle is very similar because it doesn't take so much of the energy to like create a bunch of fish eggs. Like human babies are crazy. Like a fish egg, it's not the craziest thing. So they have almost the exact same life cycle. They swim around in schools. When it's time to breed, they'll go up a river or they'll go to a place where a bunch of women will gather up. The guys spray out a bunch of sperm, the chicks spray out a bunch of eggs, and they hope it kind of pans out. And it does, like a lot of the time, but you lose a bunch of shit because they're in water. Whereas the reptile, it's like really important that they make this like sex shit work out because they're on land, and land is a hostile environment. So as you can tell, we're constantly trying to stay hydrated because we're not where we're supposed to be originally. We are from the water.
Interesting.
Right? Like every cell in our body is from the
Isn't
water.
like 70% of our body water?
That's right, that's 70% of the earth, which is one of those crazy things. So, for 4 billion years, we were in water. For another 200 million years as fish, we were in water. So I'll actually put it here. 500 mil, 4 bill. It's like 3.7, but it's fine. And reptiles are like 300. So for another 200 million years, we're also in water. So this is a long time that we're in water, and it's a water-based organism. So reptiles really got to manage the whole water situation, and that means we can. And water is life-giving too. It has nutrients in it, and it carries nutrients very easily. The air does not carry nutrients to the same degree because the nutrients fall to the ground. So you have to be very. You can't just blast your kids out into the air and hope it's going to work out. If it's a very primal organism like a tree or something, it can. But for a biological living brain operating organism, you need to be very careful about that. So they still need water to give life to this thing, but they coat it in a shell. So the water is essentially kept within the shell. And that's what an egg is. It's a little ocean with a little being in it, and then it's protected from the elements. But they need to hold territory so they can find each other, and so they can actually put the egg somewhere safe. And so they're not just blasting it, they need to have a territory that they're in control. So this is where we get the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain is literally right here, and we still have the exact same one that they have. That's all they had though, they had nothing beyond that. They have the brainstem, or the spine, and then the reptilian brain, and that's it. And what the reptilian brain allows you to do, it allows you to understand essentially your position in two-dimensional land and know if you own it or not. So this is where we get the idea of the high ground. So you'll see reptiles, they're always trying to get the high ground, because the high ground is a more easily defensible position, and they're trying to hold the largest territory that their body can feasibly defend. Because the females then are basically wandering between the territory and trying to see who's the biggest dog, right? Who's the biggest boy? The females are trying to eat as much as they can to get ready to give birth to kids. When it's mating season, they're looking around, okay, who's the biggest dog in the kingdom? And the guys get up on rocks and they start doing threat displays and showing their necks, and they usually, depending on their nutrients, a lot of reptiles will get, better coloration, so like a really bright blue or red or something like this. And they'll show their necks to each other, and they'll stand on these rocks and try to be like, I'm the biggest dog. And then some other guy will come and be like, fuck you, I'm the biggest dog. And then they'll fight, and, the most OG submission, domination, sort of shit that they're doing. And, a lot of times the guys will threat display against each other, so there's a new ability that the fish don't have, which is to read the power of another individual. So is this guy, the girls can read it, the guys can read it. So is this guy the highest T guy? Is this guy the highest dominance individual, or is he some beta, not him sort of guy? And the guys know this too, because when you see another guy, they have to regulate, am I really him, can I take this guy, or is this guy going to fucking kill me? And they have to know. So there's this new ability allowed by this really powerful hardware, which is a whole new region of the brain, very energy intensive, very powerful, very big energy draw. But they can start reading the body language of others. Fish could give a fuck. And what's crazy about it, the eyes are very similar. The eye of a fish, the eye of a reptile, of course there's some differences because one is in air, one is in water, but more or less it's a very similar thing. You look at the eye of a fish, it's pretty similar to the eye of a reptile. But the difference is the hardware behind it, the brain behind it. The fish can see another fish do a million different things, it doesn't care. It's just saying, is that fish doing something good for me or bad for me? It doesn't even have the concept of a fish at all. It just is in its world, and it feels pleasure or pain. Whereas the reptile is now in a world. There's now an ego, and it's saying, who am I in relation to this other guy? Is he bigger than me, or am I smaller than him? And are the girls liking me, or are the girls not liking me? What's happening here? How big is my territory? Am I in a bad territory? So you've got a new need, which is self-esteem versus shame. And this is the struggle of the reptile, to feel good about themselves. And they actually feel good about themselves or ashamed of themselves. And you can see it in their body language, you can see it in their behavior. It's a real thing that they're actually able to experience. And it's correlate, in their case, specifically with how much territory they hold and their mating situations. They don't have anything resembling, they don't have love, they don't have care, because they don't give live birth. So the women find a nice spot, will drop the eggs, and then leave. They rarely protect the eggs, they rarely defend the eggs, they drop them, survival of the fittest. It's great food for the birds and shit, the ones who don't make it. The ones who survive then hold their territory, maybe kill their dad and hold his territory. But the women don't nurture the kids, they pop them out in the eggs and then they leave. So the women are just trying to eat and mate and have the kids, the men are trying to eat, hold territory, try and mate and hold it down. That's what these guys are doing. And they have a new intelligence, which is the logistical intelligence, or you could think of it as kind of tactical intelligence. And this is because they have an egoic structure. And what I mean by that is they have the ability to say, I'm experiencing pleasure, I'm experiencing pain, or more specifically in the context of pain. Like, for example, something is biting my tail, right? This happens for reptiles all the time because they have long ass tails. Something is biting my tail. They're willing to actually sacrifice the tail. They'll wriggle, or they'll allow the tail to be ripped off, or they'll actively sacrifice it. You can tell they actually don't give a fuck about the tail. They'll actively sacrifice it for the survival of the larger organism. Because they understand that I am not my tail. I am not just my pleasure and my pain. I'm not just this urge for survival. I have an ego. I'm a guy. And this guy has a job, which is to hold this place. And so if this thing means losing my arm, take the fucking arm. If this means losing my leg, take the leg. Because there's something higher than that thing, which is a goal. So these guys have goals. Whereas these guys have needs, these guys have wants, these guys have goals. And they will sacrifice their wants and their needs for that goal. Because the goal is now superordinate to these other things. And this is triaged by the tactical intelligence, which allows in humans for us to say, I'm going to do this before this, or it would be good to do these things in this order, or how do, the concept
Strategy.
Strategy. Cool. Strategic is the word. I just love that. And the emotion that's available here is the emotion that is associated with this struggle, which is the feelings regarding control. So submission versus dominance. So a feeling of dominance versus a feeling of submission. The feeling of being on top of people and things, or the feeling of being underneath them. And as you have probably guessed, this is where our consciousness mainly is as a species still.
Wow. Yeah.
This is what we're talking about all the time, right?
Politics, all this shit. Power games.
The ego.
The ego.
That's where the ego develops.
This is the first. There is technically an ego here.
Yeah.
Technically an ego, but this is the first one that we would recognize as having a superordinate capacity to dominate the previous two.
Okay.
The fourth. These reptiles, they're very successful. This is a very successful mode of doing shit. They go really crazy. Around 200 million years ago-ish, these big motherfucking reptiles started popping up because the ecosystem has become essentially fertile enough to hold them. So, yeah. So essentially there's these big ass trees, there's big ass ferns, there's hella insects, there's a bunch of these smaller reptiles, and you start having the same thing happen where a bunch of reptiles differentiate, some of them start predating on each other, and you start getting more powerful ones because they start having a ton of meat and they start getting fucking jacked. And so around 200 million years ago, during the period called the Triassic, we have these big motherfuckers, bipedal, they're all bipedal, they look like this, and you have these early dinosaur homies. And these homies just start running shit. They start dominating everybody. All the other reptile homies, they just start fucking up. They have much more powerful brains, very intelligent, and they're in a very unique stance, which is they're not on all fours, but bipedal. And so, and this is the ancestors of the dinosaurs we think of. So they're, to us, they look kind of like a generic dinosaur because they hadn't specialized yet.
Right.
But the OG ones are kind of bipedal guys, very fast, very smart. They dominate everyone. Massive, horrible Permian Triassic extinction event. Volcanoes kills like 95% of life on Earth. Worst extinction event. There was a previous one, but this one is like the most bad one ever.
And what was that called?
This is called the Permian Triassic, the PT extinction event. And this is a long time ago. This allows the next phase of dinosaurs to emerge during the Jurassic. So then you have these Jurassic homies. Still not the T-Rex, but ones that you would know like Allosaurus and Stegosaurus and these sorts of guys. These guys go for another 100 million years, another extinction event. Then you have the Cretaceous, and these are the ones that we know, like Triceratops, T-Rex, these guys. So there's a long time, 150 million years of dinosaur dominance of the Earth. 150 million years where these homies are running everything. If you were to come here for 150 million years as an alien, you would just see dinosaurs. You would come here 100 million years later, see more dinosaurs. 50 million years later, more dinosaurs, and they look mad different, and they're very, very intelligent and smart. They were herbivores that form herds. They're carnivores that are preying on herbivores. They have vocalization behaviors. They have crazy colors, like the crests to like identify each other. Really complex stuff. You can imagine how crazy evolution goes.
So there was 3 dinosaur extinctions?
No, 2.
Yeah.
Oh, 3?
Well,
You said 1, then 2, and then you said, well, then there's the Triceratops or the T-Rexes that we know of, and those guys died, so that must be the third one.
Yeah, the third one is coming. Essentially, the first one, I actually fucked up a little bit. The first one allowed for the original dinosaurs to rise. So the Permian Triassic, there's 3. Because the first one, during the Permian, there were like these other reptile guys that's not important to get into, that were dominating stuff. They die in the Permian Triassic. Then you have the first dinosaurs. Then those guys die, and the delineation between Triassic and Jurassic. Then there's another extinction that ends the Jurassic, and we have the Cretaceous, and then the Cretaceous is ended by the big comet. which we'll get into. And this is our savior is a big comet, so we'll get into that in a second. During this time period, specifically after around 200 million years, our grandparents came about. And these guys are essentially evolved from the small reptiles, not the dinosaurs. They evolved from the small reptiles. The scales essentially thin and turn into hairs. So our hairs come initially from the genetics that created scales. And we get these hair. And essentially, for a very long time, for about 150 million years, so from here until where we get to later, you have very small, which you would almost think of as like shrew-like, mouse-ish, like squirrel-ish. They're before all of these things, so it's hard to do here. We think of them mainly as squirrels, burrowing squirrels. And they are living in the world of dinosaurs for 150 million years. So our ancestors, you guys have read Jung or are familiar with Jung and stuff. You know what the concept, or the primal concept in all myths, Joseph Campbell, about the dragon? Okay. Where does this concept come from? In my analysis, the concept of the dragon comes because our ancestors for 150 million years are living terrified of massive fucking reptiles. So some of the deepest genetic code is a massive fucking thing that looks like a reptile with crazy teeth and crazy reptilian eyes that's fucking chasing after you and is incredibly powerful and flies. Yeah, that's the scariest fucking thing in the world. 150 million years of that. We've been humans for like 6 million years. Like, that's going to stick around. So in the very recesses of our psyche, people are drawing crazy shit. Someone draws this like dragon thing. Everyone's like, yo, that shit's way scarier than the other thing. And then we're like, fuck yeah, let's do the dragon thing. Every culture around the world, Asia, medieval Europe, Egypt, Mesopotamia, we always come back to this like reptilian-looking dragon thing, and I think it's because we were fucking traumatized from this period. And a lot of them did flock because there's the pterodon and stuff. We just don't find their fossils as often because they're flying. But as far as we know, they were as prevalent as the dinosaurs flying around doing crazy dragon shit. So what's going on? Mammals. These guys, the big deal about them is they give live birth. The males, their lifestyle is relatively unchanged, given besides the fact that they're raised by their mothers. So a mammalian woman, a little squirrel woman, finds a man is holding some tree, or holding some bush, or some territory, and they're not like the big dogs anymore because the dinosaurs are finished. So they're holding some tiny thing. Squirrel mama comes up, they pipe. She gets pregnant, she runs off, dude doesn't care. She runs off, gives birth in a tree, or gives birth in some hole in the ground. Baby comes out. Baby is completely helpless. Whereas reptiles come out, those zombies know exactly what's going on. They come out of the shell, we're good. They're saying, okay, let's just start walking, let's start figuring shit out. They start figuring shit out. Fish babies, they're fine, they're good. Mammal baby, it needs milk. It needs the mom. It can't bleed. It needs the mom. It cannot fend for itself. And why is this? Well, because its brain is way more powerful. It has this new area of the brain which we refer to as the limbic system, emotions, raw emotions. And this is a very energy-intensive thing. It takes a long time to cook, meaning in the womb it takes a long time to cook, and when it comes out it takes a long time to develop. So these beings need a high nutrient, dense thing to feed this new, very important part of the limbic system. And so the baby is helpless. And this creates a different life cycle for children and for mothers. So the mother is now tasked with basically taking care of this child, making sure she eats enough that she can provide the milk for this child, which creates these new feelings of love. And this child also has this new understanding of there's someone who cares about me. There's a mother. This is before we know who the father is in our psyches. There's a mother. There's someone who gave birth to us and took care of us. And for a long, long time, 150 million years, we had a mother and no father. Maybe at some point we fought our father, and because the male then has to hold territory again. And this the classic Lion King shit happens where the kid grows up and he's like, who's this ugly guy holding this tree? It's my tree now. And then he kills him and he's like, holy shit, that's my dad. The Oedipus thing is from that situation. Very old situation, very, very ancient old situation. The women would, as far as we know, be raised by the mother and either stick with the mother, we don't really know, or often what happens in current mammals is they'll stick with their mothers and form a female group, or they'll do the same thing their mother did. We're not sure what these guys really did fully, but it's something on that order. The need that you now have is associated with the attachment to the mother and the survival that's inherent in that attachment. So love versus loneliness. Loneliness essentially means death, because it means no milk, it means no love. If a mother feels lonely, it's a very bad sign, it means where's my kid? Because they usually have a kid. The intelligence that you get is very, very crazy difference from the previous ones, and is supported by this new area of the brain. The intelligence that you get is the ability to read another's emotions. Better yet, whereas here you could actually think of it as kind of, or here is the ability to understand dominance and kind of read that. This is the ability to feel another's emotions. So we call this colloquial in our society the emotional intelligence, but I like to refer to it as relational intelligence, because it's the quality of the feeling of a relationship, and you are in this relationship with this other being, and you can feel their emotions. But you could call it empathetic intelligence or emotional intelligence. But the ability to feel another's emotions as your own. So the mother has this basically to understand the needs of the child, and the child has this to communicate with the
You might get to this later on in the intelligences, but I'm just curious. So I'm thinking about me and Nick and these intelligences, and like trying them on. So what's funny is I definitely have the strategic intelligence. You know how you say like we're a good team and like we work well and complement each other. I have more strategic intelligence than him, and that's where I come into play a lot. However, I also have a lot of relational intelligence where I can really empathize and understand where a person is coming from. But he has what I would call a combination of strategic and relational. So like not only can he empathize with them, but he's tactical about that.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah. So once everything's laid out, I'll show it. Where it really gets fun is how these mix and match and create the human being.
Gotcha.
So
All right.
That is
okay.
the thing. I know what that, or I have a take on what that could be, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
The type that's available here is the emotions that become available when you can feel another person's emotions. So reptiles, they never give a fuck. They never give a fuck about the other reptile. If the other reptile is like happy or sad, they're always to some degree kind of confrontational,
Right.
because they're self-obsessed. This is the ego world.
Yeah.
In the mammal world, you can feel another's emotions, even if it's your dad who you're about to kill. You are a mammal, and he's a mammal, he's your dad, or some other guy who could be your dad, and you're fighting, and you know how he feels because you have the hardware. So this is which I call usually empathy versus apathy. You could simplify it as a friendliness versus hostility. But these are two new emotions that are possible, because hostility is a choice. In humans and in mammals, it's a choice. It's a choice that I can feel his emotions. I can see it on his face. I can see it in his behavior. I know what that feels like in me, and I'm choosing to ignore it and still kill him, or still say some bad shit to him, whatever it is. Or I can see how he feels, and I'm choosing to be friendly to him. So I call it empathy versus apathy. Because apathy applies to choice.
What was the other one you used? Friendliness versus what?
Hostility. Yeah, maybe actually that's better because hostility is the choice.
For me, that resonated more.
Okay,
That's just me personally.
And just a housekeeping note is that these are
Building.
So these are the dials that are available in the emotional system at all times. So any moment that our ancestor was doing its thing, it was at a certain level of activity versus passivity. It was at a certain level, it was feeling a certain sense of craving or aversion to the activity occurring. It was feeling a certain amount of submission versus dominance, because mammals, as strange as it is, are built on reptilian hardware and constantly are aware of their submission and dominance relative to others. And then they are having this sense of, oh, I like this person. This is a guy. This is one of us, or that's my mom, or fuck this guy. Who the fuck is this guy? So we're always doing that. Mammals. Is this making sense?
Yes.
This is awesome, yeah.
It's interesting?
This is great.
Okay.
It's right up our alley.
Very good. I'll notate it here because it's crazy. Craziest thing that's happened recently in the evolution as it pertains to us in our evolutionary history. What they call chicks who love It's called Chicxulub because that's the town it hit in Mexico, but we can call it.
Chicxulub?
That's funny, actually. It's like Chicxulub. Like Chicxulub. It's like an Aztec word.
Interesting.
That's what they named the town. Essentially, 65 million years ago, a literal 10-kilometer comet came from the fucking sky and decimated life on Earth.
65 million years ago.
65 million years ago.
Did it move Earth?
No. But because Earth is like the crust of Earth is like a fraction of 1% of Earth's mass. So like everything alive, everything that we would recognize is like the film on top of it. Like
Wow, that's crazy. So it's so heavy that that was like a little
fucked. Yeah.
But the outside was fucked.
The outside was fucked because it kicks up all this ash into the atmosphere. All these little sensitive, fragile homies that breathe the atmosphere are choking and dying. And
did everyone die? Everything?
The dinosaurs certainly did.
So we're on this circle and it hits here. If I was on this side, would I be fucked still too?
Yeah, because essentially it was such a demonic impact that the ash it kicked. So okay, it did a lot of things, and this is a very fun YouTube rabbit hole when it's time, but I'll give a very brief analysis of it, which is that the impact itself kicks up so much debris. This debris was very hot because it got exploded. It wasn't like confetti. It like got exploded out of the ground into the atmosphere. As it comes back down from the atmosphere, it catches fire. And so it essentially lights everything on fire. Additionally, it went into the atmosphere, so now the Gulf Stream is blowing it around all over the Earth. This is why nukes are a really big problem, because the radiation blows around the Earth. One planet, right? So it's going, and so everything's burning. That shit is going into the sky and circulating, and the toxic, not toxic, but the flying debris is circulating everywhere. And for a couple thousand years, literally a couple thousand years, it blocks out the sun entirely, more or less, which creates a winter. Initially, it's very hot. They think most stuff died in like the first couple of days, just from like insane temperatures on the planet. But then after that, it was like a winter because the sun was blocked out. What?
That's what they call Ice Age.
Ice Age is it's a mini Ice Age. Yeah, it's a mini Ice Age. The big Ice Ages are when I actually forget the mechanism, but the big Ice Age is like hundreds of millions of years or like really long times. There's an Ice Age that happens in here. Our ancestors evolved in an Ice Age, so we'll get into that. Our human ancestors evolved in an Ice Age. We don't think about it. It's so blatant. The whole time we're in an Ice Age.
Yeah, my mind has been blown.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. Like, when you understand your ancestry, you're like, oh yeah, like I'm not like crazy. I'm just a mammal.
Right.
And like that's why I feel this. They're like, oh, I'm not crazy. I'm just built on the reptilian hardware. I'm like, of course I have. It's okay. Dinosaurs, the big homies, after 150 million years of dominance, they're dead. All of them dead. Because everything pretty much above the size of like a dog is going to die. Because it's the nutrients. What?
No, we're not.
Or no, the nutrient load is too high.
Yeah,
Dinosaurs are eating thousands of pounds of meat. So our ancestors were these burrowing squirrel homies, and so these guys survived because they were able to eat just like, an apple and nuts and make it kind of work. Whereas the dinosaurs are dying because the herbivores died first, because the plants died because of no sun. Plants died, no sun. Herbivores died, predators died.
Gotcha.
And so after a couple thousand years, these mammal guys start coming out of the ground and saying, wait, the dragons are gone? It's just us? And this is where all the crazy storybook stuff that we saw when we were kids, giraffes, lions, tigers, bears, we're in the world of mammals now. Because this little guy is much smarter than the dinosaurs, but just couldn't do anything because it was all the other niches were taken. So most things that dinosaurs did, mammals figured out. So what's a giraffe? It's a mammal brontosaurus. It eats tall shit on the trees. What's an elephant? It's like a mammal triceratops. Everything that the dinosaurs were doing in the ecosystem, mammals figured out a way to do, because that's just something that needs to happen in the ecosystem. And so for a very long time, for the last 65 million years, mammals have ruled Earth. And this is what we call they call the paleogene. Is this, the paleogene. Cretaceous and all that stuff. And this is the paleogene. And the paleogene and we're in the mammal time. And so, for a long time, the mammals were huge. We don't have them anymore. This 5-digit hand killed. Our ancestors, by hand, killed them. But there used to be what they called megafauna. So around 60 to 70 species of massive mammals that have huge metabolic loads. Essentially, they had to bulk because they were fucking huge. So 30-foot tall sloths.
Wow.
Mammals. 15-foot tall bears. Like the craziest shit you can imagine. Shit we have, but like the most demonic version of it. Like saber-toothed cats that can peel your fucking head off. Wow. The craziest shit. Because it was the mammal world. So think about how vicious the dinosaurs were. You got the mammal versions. Of course, they all have a mom, so they're a little less vicious. But they're the mammal versions. What you get is, soon, you get these homies who are hanging out in the trees. Some of these guys, some of them kind of become like cat, dog guys. Some of them have become like, other sorts of mammal guys. And some of these guys are hanging out in the trees and doing all this sort of stuff in the trees. And these are the apes. Or initially the monkeys, and then they become apes, but I just simplified it for apes. And this is only around, the monkeys are around 55 million years old, and the apes are only 25 million years old. But I kind of group them in one because they have very similar habits. So, biologists will come for me, but we just don't have the time to do all of that. Apes come from monkeys, and monkeys, what happens with monkeys and higher mammals in general, now that there's a lot more food, a lot more resources, the brain keeps developing. And what you get with these guys is a much more developed social brain. So the early mammal only has to deal with the relationship with the mother. Everyone else is more or less an enemy. The siblings, even, maybe it's like here and there, but they're not like a family unit going on an adventure. It's like mom and then like life. But apes, the metabolic processes, the energy requirements of the brain have gotten so intense, they need to team up because the babies are so helpless as kids, and there's a lot of shit to learn because they're doing complex ass stuff that the dad has to now stick around. And so if you ever see how monkeys live, they live in big troops. Sometimes 50 pairs, 50 monkeys in a troop, right? And what you have is the female society and the male society, and they coexist in one troop. And so the males are tasked with defending from other males. And then they have defending the females from other males, because other males want more breeding partners, this sort of stuff. So they have a territory, same as the whole thing. They have a territory. They're trying to defend the females, their females in that territory, and their children in that territory, and be the biggest alpha dog male guy on top of each other. And so the males are fighting for dominance. They have very complex behaviors. I'll specifically talk about the apes because there's monkeys, which is like a primal version of it, and the apes are a more complex version of it. The apes are even more developed. Essentially, there's the alpha male guy, and he's trying to keep the alpha position at all costs. And so this is all about vocalizations, big displays. He'll run around his territory smacking stuff, breaking branches, showing how crazy strong he is, doing basically doing pull-ups, acting like he's at Venice Beach and trying to mog other guys, just not talk to them, trying to be the biggest dog. And very strategically groom guys he thinks he wants on his side, and not let guys groom him that he thinks are weird. So their whole thing is about grooming. So if there's a weird guy trying to get up, he'll try and act really macho, and then once the guys kind of see him, he'll be like, okay, let me groom the lowest ranking guy. And he'll start to groom them, and then they become friends, and they create alliances, and there's all sorts of crazy, Shakespearean dynamics. Because these are very smart animals that we've seen, I think it's in Uganda, they've seen the entire plot of Hamlet being enacted. They weren't trying to, it's just Hamlet's just an archetypal structure. The uncle killing the father, and this is the Lion King too. The uncle kills the father to become the dominant guy. The son is exiled because the uncle knows that the son will challenge him for the thing, and he'll have more support from the other males. Exiles the son to another tribe. Other son trains in the wilderness to become jacked. Comes back, kills the uncle, becomes the chief.
What?
Crazy. And the women during this entire time are keeping things under control, raising the kids, trying to create partnerships with each other. They have a slight dominance hierarchy, but it's not anywhere close to what the males have. They're more communal, and the males are more thing, and the males will go out on hunting parties. For example, chimps will kill small monkeys, small things, they'll eat them, they'll even eat. But often, sometimes if a male comes to their territory, from another tribe, it's really bad news. They can enter entire ground wars and literally fight each other to the death, pull each other apart, do crazy sorts of shit. So they'll engage in wars with other troops. When you're living, it's important to remember that apes, they're living in troops. That's how they're thinking about everything, always living with troops. And so in a troop, as a woman, you're trying to get the best male so that your kid is going to be the strongest, have a good chance in the troop. Or as a male, you're trying to stay in position and be respected for who you are as this guy. So essentially the need that you have here is authenticity versus inauthenticity. You could also think of it as like full self-expression versus limited self-expression. So if you know that you're him, you want to be respected for being him. At the mammal level, you don't have this because your mom loves you no matter what you are. You could end up holding zero territory and being a runt. You could end up being the big chief of a bunch of territory. The mom doesn't care because you're her baby. But when you live in a society, you now care about how you appear to the others within that society, and you want to make sure you're getting your due for who you are. Right?
This will also be status.
So.
Or is that more the self-esteem thing?
It is the self-esteem thing. This thing is confusing because apes don't have the sixth thing that makes everything kind of crazy. So I'll get to that. So in humans, this manifests a bit differently than it manifests for them. In humans, this becomes, I guess I'll get to that, but I'm going to do a preview of it, which is in humans, this is really where you have to prove that you have self-worth, is at this level.
Yeah.
When you prove that you have self-worth and you kind of believe in yourself, you respect yourself, you're able to actually enter into actual relationship with others. Because if you always have a need for self-esteem, self-worth, you're only going to associate with people or engage in relationships that validate your sense of self-worth. You're not going to submit to a partnership that humbles you, like what you guys were talking about with marriage. That is a level 4 thing, is a partnership of saying, I love this person more than I need to be right. Or I love this person more than I need to feel cool. Right? I actually just want to be with the person. Right. Whereas here, and I can do this in kind of a frat way to make it very clear. There's no sex at the first level because it's just survival. But this is the sex where your friend, you would never tell your friends. Because it was just because it felt good, but it's not a person that you would affiliate with socially with. This is the level where you go and you show your friends. And you say, yo, look, she was so hot, blah, 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 blah. That's self-esteem. This is the level where you don't care what your friends think because you actually love them. Okay? So that's kind of how to think about those levels. The 5th level is once you actually have a strong, because these are additive, once you have a strong sense of love, a strong sense of belonging, you know that you have the access to unconditional love. It actually allows you to express yourself completely. Because until you actually feel unconditionally loved, you're always holding part of you back because you don't, at this level, it might not get you what you want. At this level, it may make you look bad. At this level, it may, disrupt the relationship. But once you are unquestionably sure that that relationship or relationships, ideally, are strong and healthy and there's nothing that can happen, you feel like you can express yourself just whatever way you want because you know they love you for you and they want you to be the maximum version of yourself. So that's what it looks like in the human. At the age
can you just explain how it fits into the troop thing? Like, how did that come from the troops exactly?
Yeah. When the human mind emerges here, it reinterprets all of these things. So that's just an important thing, is that we reinterpret all of these levels. It's not like the raw, ape version of it. It's like the human version of the ape thing. But the part of the brain that emerges is essentially the attunement to expression. Right? So the attunement to, specifically what actually happens in the brain is you get new areas that are very attentive to facial expression, very attentive to tone of voice, very attentive to body posture. Not just oh, that's a dominant posture, or that's a submissive posture. It's like, well, that was kind of...
I got you. I'm sorry to understand.
Oh, that was kind of fruity, or that was kind of whatever. A mom doesn't care. A mom's like, is my child feeling good, or feeling bad, or happy, or sad, or whatever's going on? At this level, it's like, oh, is my child spunky? Is my child shy? What's going on here? There's all this new ability. Because you're in a society, and so now there's all these relative positions. Whereas when there's just two, there's only one relationship that happens. It's less complex. Whereas when you're in a society, it's like, well, compared to the other kids his age, he's this sort of thing. So we have this whole expression, this world of expression. and they have the beginnings of the very flamboyant, crazy, expressive ability that humans have. The intelligence that you get here is it's pretty straightforward, it's expressive intelligence. The ability to communicate how you're feeling, or communicate things effectively in general. This is what you could think of as kind of rhetoric, or persuasion, or people who are really good at writing ad copy, or people who are great politicians, or people who are just good communicators in general, have this expressive capability that's high. It can also manifest in, people who are great actors are usually expressive, dominant, in the sense that they understand how to say something is just as important as what you're saying, and there's so much of that communication happening. Whereas someone who's maybe tactical or strategic dominant might be like, well, I said what I would needed to say. So,
right.
And then the type that's available here is it's essentially the possibilities that you have with an expression in any group. So to conform or to be rare.
Gotcha.
So conformity versus rarity. Okay. Apes. Anything making sense? Everything making sense?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Fantastic. Hopefully I'll try to keep it a good clip. It's just a lot of information.
No, you're doing great. You're
It
really
might take
doing
a
awesome.
second to say it.
You're doing great.
Thank you. The sixth level, there's a lot that happened in here. There are people whose entire careers are about what happened in here. There are bajillion books of what happened here. We can always go deeper into that if it's interesting, but to keep with big chunks, we'll simplify. And so this is what happened only 50,000 years ago. KA just means 1,000 ago. This is humans. So humans actually emerged around 6 million years ago. The original humans, and then the update happens 2 million years ago. But we're going to specifically talk about what happened 50,000 years ago, because that's the thing that is different about humans to a substantial degree. Of course, as humans, we are really excited about all the stuff that happened here, but we're taking the God view. The thing that is a holy shit, level jump, only happens 50,000 years ago.
Okay.
Apes, I'm trying to find a good example. Why is this, maybe this is a structural thing. Why is this shape? This is this shape because tree branches are this shape, and our hands are built for tree branches. So apes live in trees, monkeys live in trees, that's why we have the opposable thumb, is to grab a tree. Eventually, the trees start dying out in Africa because of the climate change thing, and some apes figure it out, but some of us come down onto the ground. When you're on the ground, it's more efficient to be bipedal. If you're walking over long distances and doing these things over long distances, and you're not trying to do burst speeds. Predators are doing burst speed, and they're standing a lot. If you're standing a lot, you want to be on all fours because it's better, and if you're doing burst speeds, you want 4 because you have more contact with the ground. But if you're kind of moseying for long periods, you want to be on 2. It's more efficient. And so we start standing up. What this does is frees the hands. Over time, and we're in groups still, right? A lot of other things are going on, but over time, we start getting more intense brain functions because we start figuring out some basic tools. The basic tools give us access to more energy, so bone marrow, not just, we can actually figure out how to extract more energy from that. The tools allow us to scrape a lot more.
This is where the neocortex comes in?
That's right. So the physical thing that happens here is the neocortex, and this takes about 1 million years to build, but it's basically by figuring out fire, everything's building on each other. We figure out some tools. This allows us to get more meat. The meat creates a bigger brain.
Yeah.
The brain allows us to figure out fire. Fire allows us to cook meat and make more meat and smoke meat and have more meat accessible to us all the time. We start eating more meat. Brain can.
I also read at one point that fire not only allowed us to cook the meat to make our brains bigger, but it allowed us to stay up at night and share stories with each other, which also allowed us to survive. Is that true?
I absolutely think so. The kind of I don't know if it's a dirty secret or hidden secret, but there's a big question mark as to what the fuck is going on in here. A big fucking question mark. my take, which is kind of a cooked take, but it's because I have a lot of experience with it in my life and I know its effect. I think there's a pretty good amount of psychedelic use that's happening in this period. Interesting. There's some good evidence for that, given that when we became bipedal, we would be following essentially the food source, which would be bovines and other kind of land mammals and these sorts of things. And they, when they poop, the place you find psychedelic mushrooms in nature most readily is in the poop of like elephants and cows and these sorts of things. Thank you so much. Yeah. So these are growing, like if you go to Thailand, you can find shrooms and cow poop everywhere. Psychedelic shrooms. Shrooms love growing in poop, psychedelic shrooms specifically. And so the idea is that if you were following, herds of cows and doing these hunts and these sorts of things, that we would have seen a bunch of mushrooms in this poop, and our ancestors wouldn't have been like picky about food. And would have quickly realized at a low dose, the shrooms we take today are like crazy bread and like are super psychoactive, but at a low dose, those ones would have basically just been giving you more like acuity, visual acuity, sensitivity to data and information coming from the world. And the idea is that we initially started using these to hunt. We realized it kind of gave us like a pet boost to like hunt. Like an edge, yeah. And like an edge. But eventually what starts happening is some people are overdosing and having mystical experiences, right? Or some people are, what is shrooms in? What do shrooms do in the brain? Well, what shrooms do is essentially they take off low power mode. The human body and human mind, both of them, are basically trying to stay in low power mode all the time. Because this is more efficient. You can survive longer. Maybe something's going to come in the future. We come from an environment that is very intense, but in bursts. It's not intense all the time. It's intense in bursts. You're like chilling, hanging out under a tree, then like you see a pair of red eyes. And then you're like, holy fuck. So it's not equally distributed how intense it is. It's intense in bursts, and you've got to be really good in that burst, and then you kind of chill again. So the whole body is trying to be ready for when shit hits the fan, to be able to deal with shit hitting the fan, and then be able to go back into low power mode to save up until it hits the fan again. So the brain is not trying to, especially after it's at a certain age, especially after the brain is developed, it's not trying to be sensitive to every little thing because it's an information overload, it's not energy efficient. What it tries to do is create models of how shit works, of like, oh, okay, if this is how shit's kind of like laid out, which is why we can, these days, like, there are magicians and people who like fall through the floor and we're like, because like we have a mental model like the floor is always solid, and then like it isn't, and we're like, you know what I mean? It's because it like blows our mind. Because we create these mental models. The whole point of like the magician or the optical illusionist or whatever is that like the mental model isn't always true. It's just a heuristic. And like they've been able to show this with like, like there's a famous study where they find the symbolic encodings in a mother bird's brain and trick it. So like a mother bird, we think like, oh, she knows her babies and like she's giving food to her babies and like she knows what's going on. But what they did is they did a bunch of different sock puppets and like changed the faces of the sock puppets, and we were trying to figure out what is the mother bird like responding to, but they figured out it was like the color of the inside of the throat of the baby bird. So they just made like a much more saturated version of that color, like artificially, and like much bigger. And the mother bird just would feed the sock puppet and all the babies died. Because the mother bird isn't actually every time thinking, my little tiny baby birds, like, hello. Because it takes like so much energy. It's thinking red, like, I have shit to do, I'm a mom, like, take the fucking food, and like, I'm out of here. Like, of course it's red. Like, for millions of years, my baby's throats have been red. Like, what's the problem? They're not expecting the fucking sock puppet to modern society. I'll get into that in a minute.
Wow.
But we have these symbolic encodings, but that's because we're in low power mode. When you take shrooms, essentially it jacks the brain and says, let's go full online. So all the regions of the brain that it would normally be super energy intensive and very confusing, honestly, to talk to each other, they can talk to each other now. And what is speech? What is language? What is the thing that happens in the sixth level? It's the association with some physical thing with some idea. So when I look at water, I'm not just seeing like survival thing. I'm seeing, well, my mother loves the sea, and oh, my ex-girlfriend hated this brand of Dixie cup, and 70% water.
Like the meaning?
Yeah, meaning. There's essentially these things that radiate off it, and the idea is that maybe this could have started to develop, and it's much more energy intensive to do that. Much more energy intensive to do that than to just say, oh, water's good. Then they say
thoughts.
So like kind of thoughts. And my take, just because it's so similar to what happens on shrooms, and I know the shrooms were in the environment for sure, and they probably would have been used as hunting aid. And the big proof for me, I mean it's obviously a theory, but the big proof for me, every single one, every single indigenous culture that we have come across uses some sort of psychedelic medicine. Every single one. And the origin of all religions, as far as we're aware, have something to do with psychedelics initially. Even they've now found evidence that Christianity had a psychedelic element to the wine, and that this comes from the Greek psychedelic wine in Eleusis. And that we now have pretty good evidence for this. We're waiting for the key discovery, but they have a lot of good evidence pointing to this. We know that Judaism had some of it. We know the Egyptians were taking the Egyptian water lily, which has DMT. We know the Mesopotamians were taking it. We know the Aztecs took specifically psilocybin mushrooms. We know that the Gallic tribes, so the homies that Rome was fighting all the time, the Viking homies, these homies were taking mushrooms. We know the Vikings were taking mushrooms. Pretty much everyone we know is taking some form of psychedelic, and it seems to be the fountainhead of religious experience. And the shamanic thing that ends up becoming the religion thing, which ends up becoming kind of the thing.
Wow.
So there's a lot to talk about in here. And there's a lot of reason why I said, why 50,000 years ago did this happen? And, to give the short answer, you could say it's just a chain reaction of technology building on itself. You could say it's a chain reaction plus mushrooms. There's a million different ways you can cut it. The fact of the matter is that we know for sure is that humans were only in East Africa. That's the only place they were for millions of years. In the body plan that we have now, the exact this thing, like if one was born today and came to school, you wouldn't notice the difference physically. That's at least 200,000 years old, 200 to 300,000 years old. The mind, though, that could functionally, in our terms, to use a technical term, would be mentally retarded, in the sense that it would not understand the symbolic world. They would not be able to do math. They would not be able to talk in the way that we talk. They would probably be able to gesture and stuff, but they wouldn't be able to talk and learn languages. That comes around 50,000 years ago. And what we see is a very strange thing, and this is in the archaeological record, so it's not like a conjecture. What you see is we go from using around 3 to 5 tools every day. So like a cutting tool, a dashing tool, like a precision tool, to suddenly having 97 tools in the span of 5,000 years. It's a very short amount of time. We go from not being able to fish at all to suddenly subsisting a lot on fish. Then coming up with spears and stuff like this.
So is this that technology law? What's it called? Is it Moore's law?
Moore's law.
Where basically it's 10xing?
Moore's law is like a semiconductor thing specific to this, but it's the same principle.
Can it be applied to technology in general?
The principle can, yes. Which is that it builds on itself. This is what happened here is specifically a capacity upgrade for that to happen in the first place. So the Moore's law thing is happening through biology. Like all of this is Moore's law in biology. You need an actual new body to have a new thought. Whereas what happens at 50,000 is the same body can have new thoughts. And this is a big fucking change. This is essentially the degree of the change that happened here before atoms and stuff. It's that big of a deal. You go from material evolution to biological evolution to mental evolution or cultural evolution. Because this means that a grandfather can figure something out, the son can improve on it, the son can improve on it, the son can improve on it, and that's when you get the crazy exponential stuff, which you have here have been happening over millions and millions of years. Suddenly you have it happening over thousands of years, or with us over months with AI, right? Which is why it's so crazy. But we get the ability for new stuff happening in one body at 50,000 years. And so in a blink of an eye, actually a blink of an eye, even in human terms, we go from being maybe around 70,000 individuals, 70,000 humans in Africa, with 3 tools, to, over the span of 15,000 years, 30,000 years, being on every continent on the planet, having exterminated any animal that poses any threat to us at all. Saber-toothed tigers, mammoths, any large megafauna, completely extinct. We don't even know them. We don't even know what the fuck that is. You have to go to the Natural History Museum to know, because our ancestors killed these motherfuckers that much. Every other human species, there was other at least 4 or 5 other human species. We're not even talking about like the OG kind of like, pre-Homo guys, like, Australopithecus, these sorts of guys, which were around too. We're talking Homo designated guys. So Homo neanderthalis, Homo denisovans, Homo florensis. These other, what Homo means human type guys. Not as smart as us, not as great as, but human type guys. Hobbit sort of guys. We killed these motherfuckers too.
Wow.
There's some interbreeding of European populations with the Neanderthals, like 2 or 3% of the DNA is Neanderthal DNA. But otherwise, either we killed them or we just starved them out because we were so dominant in the hunting game that we just starved them out. The megafauna, I don't think we killed each one by hand. Essentially what happened is, because they're so big, it takes a lot longer to gestate children. So a mammoth.
Why didn't we kill all of them?
Yeah, I think it was kind of we didn't really understand what was going on. Like a mammoth, so like human babies, like 9 months, still comes out undeveloped, right? We come out early because the brain is too big, it would kill the mother otherwise. That's why we're so malleable. More on that later. But a mammoth, we're talking a year and a half for a kid to come out. So there's a certain point, if you kill enough mammoths, they just can't catch up. It's not like you went and killed every single one. It's just that your killing rate is higher than the birth rate. And there's so few of them that nothing was evolved to kill them. Like nothing can kill a mammoth. Stuff can kill a baby mammoth. Stuff can kill a weak mammoth. Nothing can kill a big mammoth because a big mammoth lives with 30 other mammoths. But a human, 50 dudes who their whole life have been doing mammoth hunting and that's all they think about, they're going to kill that mammoth. And they're going to kill another mammoth in a couple months. And they're going to kill another mammoth and then no more mammoths. And the last mammoth only died a couple thousand years ago, maybe 3,000 years ago or something like that. The pyramids are older than the last mammoth because it was on some island that humans didn't get to because it was in the fucking Siberian brick wilderness. But if humans don't get there, they survive. So, pretty crazy.
So you were saying they were in Africa, there were 70,000 of them, and then where did they get to?
You can kind of choose whatever you want. Like, we don't know for sure. We know that there were 70,000, more or less, because there was a big volcano that exploded and brought the population down to a really small number. That's why we're all so similar. A troop of 55 chimpanzees has more genetic diversity than all the human race. Because we're from one tiny group of people that just figured it out and just went crazy. And we figured out, the needle and thread so we can make clothes. That's how we defeated the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals wore some clothes, but not like parkas and crazy stuff, because they were pretty smart, but not as smart. So their bodies were just much better for the cold. So they had much bigger noses, much bigger chests. They were doing like Wim Hof all day. We are not like that. We're from Africa. We're from the heat. So we made clothes and killed them and took over Europe. So by 15,000 years ago, the whole planet has the handprint of man on it. And this is the first time that human species is all over the place. And then eventually, in the Middle East, civilization emerges, and then that ends up conquering the world 500 years ago. But the thing that changed here is...
Where was the first civilization?
They say, the Middle East, 10,000 years ago.
Where?
Iraq, that region. Fertile Crescent, so between these two rivers in there. I have theories on why that is, but essentially in the Amazon, you don't have a big pressure to start civilization because life is pretty good. Fruit grows on the trees. You're essentially in the Garden of Eden. We had this idea that tribal people are scared of animals. Tribal people are not scared of animals. Tribal people dominated the entire fucking planet. Tribal people know exactly where the jaguar is at all times. When you hear stories of the original, Amazonian tribes, when even 100 years ago, when gum rubber guys are going there to chop down trees and just getting murked by jaguars and disease and stuff, the tribal guys have no problem. They're like, how do the tribal guys do this? Because they know every plant, they know every bird, they know every sound, they know everything. They know that, the peccary stork makes this sound when they see a jaguar. I heard a peccary stork 30 miles from whatever. I know exactly where I am in the forest because I grew up here and my grandfather lived here and he grew up. They know exactly what the fuck is going on. You know what I mean? They're not worried. They're posted. They work 4 hours a day, they gather some shit, and then they dance, and they sing, and they tell stories, and they send the boys to go on jaguar hunts and stuff. They're having a pretty good time. They don't mind. If you're in the fucking Middle East, and some dude who's living in some lavish oasis has picked you out and was strong enough to do buffet you, and you're living in the shittiest, most arid place, and food is really hard to come by. You have a pretty good incentive to like figure out the whole like sustainable food thing over time. Whereas like you don't really care if you're in the Amazon or you have the buffalo or you care if you're in like the shittiest place on earth, the fucking Middle East, and you're like, we gotta figure this out, boys. Like how do we do this? And then you start having land, and you start being like, oh well, the other guy's getting more land, and he's taking our farmland. Let's fucking fight, and you get the whole thing. But 3,000 years ago, you got essentially the ability to have symbolic thought. So a stone is not just a stone. The stone means X. Or this, my mother just died. Where'd she go? Not just like, oh, she died. Like, no, where is she? Because there was a personality there. I know the body's dead, but the personality must be somewhere. Oh, it's in the tree. It's in the birth of religion, the birth of all this sort of stuff, and the birth of the ability to come up with new ideas.
Critical thinking?
Yeah, critical thinking is a version of it, for sure. But the rawest part of it is just symbolic capacity. And so the need you get here is suddenly the world has become a lot more confusing because there's a lot more possibility, right? If that is just water, I know what it is, it's fine. But if that could mean anything, now there's a need to know what it is. So the need that emerges for the human is the need for insight versus illusion, to know how things work, to know how the world is made. And this is what religion is the answer to. This is what
religion is the answer to.
This is what religion is the answer to. This is what science is the answer to. This is what Nike is the answer to. This is what all of this shit is. Any philosophy is an answer to this thing. This is what the Stoics are an answer to, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Nike is actually maybe more an answer to like something like that. But it comes through the lens of, well, you need to know how to live, and how to live is to like be athletic and dominant. And so the intelligence is pretty straightforward. This is the intelligence that is really the only intelligence our society gives one fuck about, which is the cognitive intelligence, the IQ, or the logical, rational intelligence, the ability to manipulate symbols in your mind and carry ones into vision, this sort of thing.
How is that different from the tactical / strategy?
The strategic one in the human. So, because we have the symbolic intelligence. It colors all the other ones too. But tactical intelligence, for example, I could be like a construction site manager and like know really well like we need to do these things in this order. But like if someone shows me like a spreadsheet, like I have no idea what the fuck is going on, Or if someone was trying to have me like figure out like a logical puzzle like
I gotcha. No, I understand.
Do you know what I mean? Like one of them is like this needs to happen and like this thing.
The way I understand when you talk about these things is I just think of people that I know.
Yeah, that's the way.
And I just thought of Frank is strategically intelligent. Like he could look at a house and know how it's built within fucking seconds, but he's like not smart. Like he couldn't even sit down at a computer and do anything.
Exactly, because the computer thing is like a symbolic thing.
Right.
Whereas, and he can. The way for him is he would. What you do is you break down the symbols into the tactics for him, and that's when the system is fun. But anyway, the type that's possible here is what happens when there's a way that multiple things can go. Apes see a cave, they know exactly what's going on. They say, it's a cave. It's dark in the cave. And the reptile sees a cave and says, yeah, it's a cave. There's probably food in there. A human says a cave and says, what does that mean? What the fuck is going on in that cave? I have no idea. It's like, we know it's in the cave. It's like, it's a fucking cave. But you're thinking like, no, but like, what? Like, it's so mysterious. Like, what's happening there? I can't see in there. Like, what's going on? And so we have the ability to have experience mystery or certainty. An ape would not care one fuck about Nancy Drew. It says, oh, they died? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The big question for number 6 is why.
That's right.
That's their big question.
That's right. And what does it mean?
So what did you write there? What's type?
Sorry, mystery versus certainty. It's a really bad certainty.
Mystery.
Are you familiar with the monk who set himself on fire in Vietnam during the Vietnam War?
Yeah.
His name is Thick Quang Duc, and this guy is a great example of certainty. Jesus is another great example of certainty. Certainty is essentially, it's different than what an ape has. An ape has basically tactical certainty, in the sense that given what's going on, I'm certain of this. A human has this other thing, which is, I don't give a fuck what happens. I'm entirely certain of this. The world could be falling on my head. I don't give a fuck. I believe this forever. That's what a human can do, which they can't do, because we have symbolic intelligence. So Thich Quang Duc does not fuck with what's going on in Vietnam. He's not happy about it. Does not like how the Buddhists are being treated. Not happy about it. Says, I'm going to set myself on fire to prove a message. He sits down very calmly. They douse him in kerosene. He says a prayer to the Buddha. They light a match. They set him on fire. This man burned to death over the course of, let's say, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. He did not make one facial expression besides the natural expression of the skin tightening and this sort of thing. Did not make an expression. Did not make a sound. Did not move posture. He died in upright posture.
Oh my God.
The body fell over when the body was too burned to support the muscles and were too burned to support it. The body just fell over. He died sitting without making a sound, without opening his eyes, without making a peep or a movement. That is something only a human being can do. To say, everything is wrong. Everything is wrong. The body is wrong in the body. It feels fucking horrible. Everything is wrong. Everything is wrong. And for the Buddha, I'm locked. Wow. It's Jesus on the cross saying, yeah, this is clearly wrong for my body and for the lower things, but in the name of the Lord, I'm doing this for the people. I'm doing this for something bigger than myself. Forgive them, Father. That sort of stuff. And that gives me chills to say. That's something no other animal can do. Is I am certain. No matter what happens, I'm certain. And this can make us very dumb. This can make us very valiant. This also can make us very dumb, very valiant. The mystery, it can confuse us forever because we're acting like something that's not that mysterious and super mysterious. But there's always a way to look at it that is pretty mysterious, you know?
This is where a lot of shit comes into play. Art, just everything.
That's right. And it's very easy for that. This is a big thing that's happened recently is with our move to science. We're essentially just looking at the certain version of everything. And we're like, yeah, there's no mystery in it at all. The human body, we know exactly how it works. What's the problem? Whereas like, there's always the ability as a human to do it, but it's kind of crazy, to like be a human and like feel this shit. It's like, yeah, I know it's norepinephrine 6, I know. But it's kind of crazy. That's like the mystery of it. Mm-hmm. That's why the Lakota Indians, when we were interacting with them, or when they were unfortunately genocided and defeated, and there were some people doing biography work with them or archaeological work with them, we kept translating their name for God, which is Wakantanka. We kept translating it as the Great Spirit, or the Great One, or these sorts of things. And there's a holy man, Black Elk, who kept correcting them and saying, that's too simple. It's the great mystery. Or he kept looking for the word in our language to mean like we have no fucking clue, basically. And they call it the great mystery. In the Hebrew tradition, once you get into the higher levels, they call it Ein Sof, the limitless. Right? It doesn't stop. It doesn't start. We have no idea what the fuck is going on at all. And even that is behind a veil that they have a name for. And that's even the second veil before Ein Sof Or, which is the limitless light. And we don't even know shit about that. So there's an ability in the human mind to be very certain or to be very confused about something that should be certain. Or not should be certain, but could be certain. The seventh is essentially a stand-in for the highest potential available within a human. It's kind of sliding, because it could, if all of us were at level 7, there's probably something else that would emerge, and maybe it's not even human, who knows, but 7 is possible in a human being. This is where Buddha is, and Jesus is, and these guys. Saints are essentially at this level, which is the human operating at the most maximum final capacity. It's when they've mastered the rest of the system, they're operating at this highest level. And so you could think of the ancestor here as just being the soul, or as being the highest manifestation of the human being, which is the soul. The need here is to, in Buddhist philosophy, they would call it skillful means, upaya. Jesus would call it, right action, or doing whatever he is doing. In every tradition, it's the idea of the correct conduct. And the goal there is to be in alignment with the universe. In Taoism, they would call it, the way, or the Tao. Right?
Nature.
So this is flow versus frustration. The idea is once you've mastered the rest of the system, you know the rules of the game, so you can actually flow with the universe. You have the tool to deal with the thing that's coming at you. You can flow with it. You're only not flowing with it when you're doing the wrong action to the response. Because you've mastered insight, you know that there are always two. You know that there's good and bad, and they are always going to come to you. You know you can't escape. You know that spring comes, but also fall comes. You know that good things come with a consequence and bad things don't, right? All the wisdom of the sages is in you, truly activated and living within you. Then there's no frustration. When is there frustration? You know what to do, and it's just flow. And that's the highest ability that the human can activate within themselves, is you have your survival figured out, or you don't care enough about survival, like you have this dealt with, and these can be dealt with in different ways. You feel like you have self-esteem, you feel like you belong, you feel like you are who you need to be, you're expressing yourself properly, you know the nature of things. That gives you the ability to dance with the universe to flow. And this will manifest differently for different people. There are some people that get there by sitting forever. There are some people that get there through interacting with the world. There are many different ways to flow. But there's one destination, which is to flow. The intelligence here is an intelligence that's available the whole time, but it gets more and more profound over time, which is the spiritual intelligence. The intelligence of the prophets, or the intelligence of signs and being able to understand the meaning of things. It's activated in us all the time, though, and so it's always there. It gets more profound over time. And the type that's possible here, I actually have a pretty hard time with understanding this one, and I'm still working on this. What I have sometimes called it is, it comes from the Hebrew tradition and the Buddhist tradition. They say that there's kind of the primordial two that exist in the divine are essentially, the great mother and the great father, or the great yin and the great yang, or wisdom and emptiness. The two kind of things are going on. And I think the feeling that you can have, I'm not there, so I don't know. So my guess is that there's these two kind of feelings, which are, you could more or less think of as kind of the Mother Teresa feeling, or the Buddha feeling, which is essentially the feeling of fullness, of being involved in the world and in love with the world and serving the world totally, or the feeling of complete freedom from the world and lack of association with the world at all, which is also a very enlightened thing. Both of them are enlightened. One of them is being so in the world and out of it. Yeah. And one of them is kind of being so out of it.
Good versus evil.
Yeah. That's interesting.
When you were saying spiritual, I'm thinking of all these concepts like heaven, hell, good, evil.
Yeah.
That kind of duality.
These I think the idea that both of them are both good, could be both good or evil.
Gotcha. So they're not opposites. They're just spectrums.
Yeah.
Like the ends of a spectrum.
Yeah. They're kind of like cycles,
Okay,
so
craving
something you need, craving the guy hunger, or you would not ever repeat. But aversion, too much aversion, you're a scary cattle.
This is like the quantum thing of unity, and it comes back to itself.
Yeah, maybe
selflessness to self-awareness versus
What do you have right now? What are you working with?
It's a tough one, man.
It's a tough one. I think the idea is essentially the many or the one, or kind of the involvement with the world, or because this is usually what happens.
Passive or active?
No. On a spiritual level. So Jesus kind of does both of these. He's kind of completely transcendent, but he's also helping people and healing mysteries.
Because he's both human and God at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Whereas Buddha isn't healing tummies. Buddha's talking sometimes.
He's straight God.
But he's just straight God. He's straight I'm done here. You figure it out kind of deal. Later on the Buddhists are maybe we should help others now that we kind of have it figured out. But the OG Buddha, he has infinite compassion, obviously, because he realizes everyone else, but he's not messing up that state. He's just locked. He's just free of it all, right? Whereas there's another way to God, which is to be so involved in service to the world that you also merge with the Creator, because you realize you are with everyone else versus you're nobody, so you're that sort of thing. It's the many or the one. I don't know though. So
freedom versus connection.
Yeah, I've used freedom versus fullness. because it's like the S, but
I like it.
so
That's a good one too.
But this one is a work in progress, so.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Okay. So,
Wow.
the system. This isn't even states, because states get a little crazier and they have their own thing going on, and I'm also redesigning that system. But the idea is that I walked you through all of this from the lens of the ancestors, through the ancestor species. The thing is that these levels all exist within us right now, in the human form. So our first, level, survival versus death, is a much more complex version of survival versus death than the original cell one. Not only do we have more needs and experiences, but we also have thoughts about what death means and this sort of thing, right? Because we have these higher capacities as well. This capacity, in a lot of people, is kind of latent, the kind of higher capacity, but as you start to wake up, it becomes more powerful. And yeah, with the levels, specifically the needs, the higher needs are compressed into the lower needs until a certain level is stabilized. For example, if I'm at level 2, if I'm in pleasure and pain, I'm trying to get out of pain and into pleasure, which is also a very good place to be because it's all just about your own sensations. The need for self-esteem is kind of compressed into this. For example, I may make a fool out of myself. Like you see people who make a fool out of themselves because they're having such a good time. Or like in college, like you're so hammered, you're like making a fool out of yourself in front of a girl or something because you want to just be with her so bad or something like this. You have no ego that's regulating.
And that kind of like addiction too.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great point. That's you don't give a shit
how you look. You just want pleasure at all costs.
That's right. That's right.
You don't care how you feel about yourself either. That's not even one of your needs. It's just pleasure over everything.
Right. The problem is that you actually do have this need. Right. You're just suppressing, or it's just collapsed into this one. So they will, when you talk to an addict, this will be what they're focusing on, but they will be guilty about themselves or feel like they're failing self-esteem wise and failing at love. If I'm at level 3, I still have all these needs. But I'm just gonna express myself in a way that gets me self-esteem. I'm gonna dress with what the people who have esteem dress like that I care about. I'm gonna think the things that they think, or I'm gonna think the things that are gonna increase my esteem. Right? I'm gonna associate with the people that are gonna make me feel esteem. So all the higher ones exist, they're just compressed to the level of the one you're at. The idea is that when you're at the final level, each thing is its full radiant possibility. So when you actually have 4 finished, 5, your sense of expression is not just to make you feel good, or to make you look good, or to make you fit in, or conform to your community, but it's what you really want to say, dress, this sort of thing. So you have it before that. Everyone always cares about how they dress, but they care about it in different stages, if that makes sense. So these build and do that. The type dials, you can almost think of them as kind of like dials. So in every second, there's someone has some amount of these going. Sometimes you're in a very neutral state. You don't feel incredibly submissive or incredibly dominant. But there are certain scenarios in which you will, and certain people are much more attentive to that all the time, and this sort of thing. But these are essentially the dials that are creating every emotion. So I don't, refer to happiness or sadness or grief, because I think these are actually very clumsy terms to refer to something that's much more complex. For example, you want to say sadness. Sadness is usually pretty low energy, negative emotion, or averse, unpleasant. It's low energy averse. Anger is usually unpleasant, high energy. Right? So you can create the terms that we use, but you can also make them much more specific and kind of refined as well. And I haven't figured out how to do all the things, but I have some thoughts on how to make it more usable later. The intelligences are essentially they have 3 attributes in the way that they manifest in the body. So the first is that they're ranked in you in terms of their dominance in your system. So in me, I'm, I think, 7 dominant, 5 secondary, aesthetic, tertiary, relational, 4th, that sort of thing. So they're ranked in a certain order, and when something happens to me, the first thing I think is, what does it mean? the first thing, before did that feel good, did that feel, first thing is what does that mean, what's the sign, what's the, because it can drive me crazy, but it can also be very helpful. But that's I7, the seventh intelligence, is just what does it mean? What's the meaning here? What are they trying to tell me? When you guys said, people stop saying, oh, that's great, how can I help? And they start saying, what's next? That's using I7. Because tactically, you could just say, well, it's just a figure of speech. But from a meaning perspective, you guys are attentive to what is that saying? What's going on here? That's an I7 thing. So they're ranked in your system, and everyone has a different ranking, and there's many permutations, as you can imagine, of the rankings. What you were saying about Nick as having, like a mix between tactical and relational, maybe you're relational dominant and tactical secondary. And that means that you're thinking about the person's emotions first, and then you're thinking about how to be tactful with it, whereas maybe you're the opposite way, or some other permutation of that. After the dominance ranking, there's a development level. So these can become much more potent over time as you refine them. So and a big problem in our society is we only really train the sixth intelligence, like in school. Like the other intelligence get trained like passively in the sense of like you go to recess and like you have friends and like so you're doing 4 stuff and like you have to wear something if you go to school allows you to. So like you're working on 5 stuff, expressing them. You have to talk in certain class, you're working on I5 stuff. Or etc. You get to kind of play around with the other ones, but the only one we really go to school for is usually number 6, I6. Cognitive, learning math, learning grammar, this sort of stuff. And by extension, you have to learn tactics to like manage your homework and live in the world. But we don't really have like schools unless you specialize in like art or something for the other ones as a society. So we have a big problem where a lot of people who are, let's say, dominant in another one think that they're bad or not smart or have some big problem because they are actually dominant in something and maybe very low at 6, and that trips them out, makes them go in other directions. And also, you never necessarily develop that skill because you don't realize that's actually what you're good at. You just think it's your weakness or something. You don't understand what's going on with you. So you can be 5 dominant and never have really refined it.
Yeah.
Right? So
I'm dyslexic, and I didn't find that out till much later in life.
Mm-hmm.
And when I found it out later in life is when I found out that it was an advantage. But before that, I was always the dumb one in my family out of my siblings because I went to school and didn't learn the information the same way they did.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a personal example of I know exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly, yeah. I feel the same way with ADHD and OCD and that sort of stuff as well. So there's the dominance in your system, the ranking, there's the development, so how kind of strong they have become, and the final thing, and this you could put it in, you could leave it out, but it's the potency. And by potency, I mean as a percentile of the population, how strong is this thing? So if, for example, someone may be 6 dominant, but as a percentage of the population, maybe they're kind of average, and the whole thing is shifted down, right? Or someone is 6 dominant and they're 99th percentile 6 dominant, So each intelligence also has like a potency relative to the population. Sometimes people don't love to hear that, so don't need to stress that. Like when I'm out the gate, I don't necessarily mention that, but I think it's true. As far as I can tell, it is true. And there are people who are drastically more powerful emotionally than other people, and can like just hold enormous like emotional loads that just shatter other people. There are people who can like tactically take on like like the manager for some like crazy musician is doing like the craziest tactics all day of calling the right people, doing the right things that would break my mind a million times over. Some people can hold spiritual meanings that would like be fun, so potency is a thing in there as well. So that's how the intelligences work. And so at every moment you're at a certain level of needs, you're using a certain intelligence or multiple intelligences, and you're feeling a certain set of emotions that are defined by these dials, and you're at a certain state of consciousness, which we can get to later, but this is it.
That was fucking awesome, man.
This is fucking great.
Let me take a picture of you in front of your work, just from memory.
Do you think 7 could possibly be AI?
Or
just machines?
I mean, yeah, I think that as like a very like human person, I, don't love that idea or certain aspects of the idea, or maybe I don't like the intention and the level of consciousness at which AI is being developed currently. Like nuclear, for example, like nuclear could fix our shit, but we just have it in the hands of the warmonger people. Like AI could fix our shit, but it's in the hands of people who are trying